It reportedly began with a quiet internal request circulating through Windsor Castle's administrative offices late one evening, a request that palace aides allegedly tried to contain before it reached Princess Anne. But according to insiders familiar with royal operations, the moment Anne discovered certain historical artifacts were being considered for relocation under Queen Camilla's expanded planning proposals, the atmosphere inside the castle shifted instantly. What initially sounded like routine reorganization soon evolved into a chilling confrontation over legacy, authority, and the sacred history of the crown itself. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. According to palace insiders, the proposal allegedly centered around selected historical artifacts housed within carefully preserved areas of Windsor Castle, where generations of monarchs have protected pieces tied directly to the identity of the British crown. Reports suggest Camilla's team had quietly explored the possibility of repositioning several important items as part of broader private display restructuring connected to future royal hosting arrangements. On the surface, the idea reportedly appeared administrative, practical, even harmless. But those familiar with the emotional significance attached to Windsor Castle allegedly understood immediately why the situation carried enormous risk once Princess Anne became aware of it. For Anne, insiders whisper, Windsor was never merely another royal residence. It represented continuity itself, a living archive of royal sacrifice, grief, victory, and survival stretching across generations of monarchy. Every corridor allegedly carried memory. Every preserved object symbolized permanence during times when the institution itself often faced uncertainty. Sources close to palace operations claim Anne viewed many of the historical collections as untouchable royal heritage, connected directly to Queen Elizabeth II's lifelong commitment to preserving the dignity and historical integrity of the crown. And, according to some royal commentators, that emotional connection explains why aides reportedly feared the fallout long before Anne officially intervened. As whispers spread quietly between senior staff members, tensions allegedly escalated behind closed doors with surprising speed. Palace insiders claim there were immediate concerns that even discussing the relocation of certain artifacts could trigger accusations of overreach during an already delicate period for the monarchy. King Charles's reign had reportedly brought growing anxieties surrounding modernization, succession, and the future public image of the institution. Within that atmosphere, even symbolic changes inside Windsor Castle carried dangerous implications. Some aides allegedly believed Camilla's planning circle underestimated how deeply Princess Anne viewed her role as protector of royal tradition. Others feared the proposal would inevitably be interpreted as an attempt to reshape spaces emotionally tied to the late Queen's legacy. Reports suggest Anne's reaction was swift, cold, and unmistakably firm. Various interpretations of internal discussions describe the Princess Royal immediately questioning both the purpose and the symbolism behind relocating historically important pieces within Windsor Castle. According to insiders familiar with royal administration, Anne allegedly saw the matter not as logistical planning, but as something far more serious, a quiet challenge to the monarchy's historical continuity itself. Palace staff reportedly noticed the atmosphere changing almost overnight. Conversations became guarded. Internal coordination allegedly tightened, and whispers surrounding protecting the Queen's legacy began circulating through royal offices with increasing urgency. What made the conflict even more explosive was the emotional weight attached to Windsor Castle during this period of royal uncertainty. The monarchy was already navigating illness, transition, and rising public scrutiny. In that fragile environment, insiders claim any perceived alteration to historically sacred royal spaces risked becoming symbolic of something much larger than rearranged artifacts. Some palace observers reportedly viewed the disagreement as an early sign of deeper divisions emerging quietly between traditionalists determined to preserve royal continuity and those favouring a more modern institutional approach under the King and Queen's evolving reign. And beneath the silence publicly maintained by the palace, one reality allegedly became impossible for insiders to ignore. This was never truly about furniture, displays, or event preparation. It was about power, memory, legacy, and the growing struggle over who would ultimately shape the monarchy's identity in the years ahead. But the real conflict was never simply about moving artifacts, it was about who had the authority to reshape the monarchy's historical identity. For generations, Windsor Castle has reportedly stood as more than a royal residence. Palace historians often describe it as the living archive of the monarchy itself, a fortress where every painting, document, ceremonial object, and personal artifact carries emotional weight tied directly to the crown's survival across centuries. So when whispers emerged that certain historical pieces could be repositioned or relocated, insiders claim alarm spread quickly among the monarchy's traditional guardians. According to palace insiders, Windsor Castle has long been viewed within royal circles as the emotional centre of the monarchy's historical identity. It is not simply a place where monarchs reside or host state occasions. It reportedly functions as a carefully preserved sanctuary, where generations of royal memory remain protected through objects that symbolize triumph, grief, sacrifice, and continuity. Every preserved room allegedly tells part of the institution's story. Every artifact carries significance tied to moments the monarchy survived war, scandal, abdication crises, and public upheaval. And because of that emotional weight, even the suggestion of relocating certain historical items reportedly triggered deep anxiety among palace traditionalists almost immediately. Sources familiar with Windsor's internal operations claim some of the artifacts under discussion were believed to hold direct connections to Queen Elizabeth II's reign, including pieces associated with wartime remembrance, coronation traditions, and private family history that remained emotionally important to senior royals. Palace commentators suggest these collections were never viewed merely as decorative displays. Instead, they allegedly represented physical reminders of stability during decades when the monarchy faced enormous public and political pressure. For Princess Anne especially, insiders whisper, preserving those historical connections became deeply personal after the Queen's passing. Many reportedly saw Anne not simply as the Princess Royal, but as one of the last remaining protectors of the institutional values Elizabeth spent her lifetime defending. That emotional divide allegedly became central to the growing conflict surrounding Camilla's proposals. Supporters of the Queen reportedly viewed the discussions as part of a broader modernization effort intended to refresh certain royal presentation spaces for future hosting and ceremonial planning. To them, insiders claim, the idea was practical rather than provocative. But within the older guard of palace operations, the proposal reportedly triggered immediate concern that important symbolism could gradually be diluted under the language of modernization. Royal traditionalists allegedly feared the monarchy was entering a dangerous period where convenience and contemporary image management risked overriding historical continuity itself. According to palace staff, comparisons were quietly made to earlier preservation disputes that unfolded behind the scenes during previous reigns, moments where royal collections became symbolic battlegrounds over identity, authority, and legacy. Some insiders reportedly argued that once historically sacred spaces begin changing according to shifting personal preferences, the monarchy risks weakening the emotional foundations that allow the institution to survive across generations. Others believed the reaction from Anne's supporters reflected a deeper fear already growing within royal circles that the monarchy's future direction under King Charles and Queen Camilla could slowly drift away from the preservation principles associated so strongly with Queen Elizabeth II. As whispers intensified through Windsor's administrative corridors, staff members allegedly became increasingly nervous about how Princess Anne would respond once the full scope of the discussions reached her directly. Reports suggest aides quietly attempted to contain the situation before assumptions hardened into confrontation. But by then, the emotional stakes had reportedly become impossible to separate from the practical ones. Because inside Windsor Castle, every object carries meaning beyond its physical presence. Every preserved artifact symbolizes part of the crown's enduring authority. And for Anne, according to those familiar with her thinking, altering those symbols risked disturbing something far more fragile than palace decor. It threatened the continuity of royal memory itself during one of the monarchy's most uncertain transitions in decades. And according to insiders, the moment Anne reviewed exactly which items were under discussion, her response became immediate and uncompromising. Reports suggest Princess Anne reacted with a level of firmness that stunned even long-time royal staff accustomed to her famously disciplined approach. Various interpretations of internal meetings describe Anne allegedly blocking the relocation discussions almost immediately, insisting that Windsor Castle's historical artifacts were not decorative assets to be rearranged according to personal preference or shifting royal image strategies. To some insiders, it marked the moment the Princess Royal drew a hard line around the monarchy's historical memory itself. According to palace whispers, the atmosphere inside Windsor reportedly changed the moment Anne formally entered the discussion. Staff members familiar with her decades-long reputation for discipline and institutional loyalty allegedly understood immediately that compromise would become extremely difficult once she viewed the issue as a matter of royal preservation rather than administration. Sources claim Anne reacted not with emotional outrage, but with something many insiders described as even more intimidating cold certainty. The kind of certainty built from a lifetime spent defending the monarchy through scandal, transition, public scrutiny, and private grief. And according to several palace observers, that unwavering resolve transformed what may have begun as an internal planning proposal into a much larger confrontation over who truly safeguards the crown's legacy during uncertain time. Reports suggest Anne privately viewed the relocation proposal as a dangerous symbolic overreach at a moment when the monarchy could least afford internal instability. Senior aides allegedly warned that altering historically sensitive areas inside Windsor Castle risked triggering backlash not simply among royal traditionalists, but within palace structures already strained by growing succession anxieties surrounding King Charles's reign. To Anne, insiders whisper, the issue was never merely about where artifacts would physically stand. It was about what those objects represented. Continuity, duty, permanence. Every preserved piece reportedly carried emotional and constitutional weight connected to monarchs who protected the institution long before the current generation inherited its responsibilities. Sources familiar with internal conversations claim Anne repeatedly defended preservation principles closely associated with Queen Elizabeth II herself. Throughout her 70-year reign, the late Queen allegedly treated Windsor Castle not as a personal residence, but as sacred royal ground entrusted temporarily to each generation before being passed forward intact. That philosophy reportedly shaped Anne's thinking profoundly after Elizabeth's passing. Palace commentators suggest Anne came to see herself as one of the final protectors of the Queen's institutional discipline during a period when modernization pressures and public image strategies increasingly collided with older royal traditions. And according to insiders, once Anne believed those principles were being challenged, her resistance became immediate and uncompromising. But not everyone within royal circles reportedly viewed the situation the same way. Camilla's allies allegedly felt Anne's reaction became unnecessarily severe, particularly because the original discussions had reportedly been framed as practical adjustments tied to future hosting arrangements rather than permanent structural changes. Some insiders claim frustration quietly spread among those who believed the monarchy needed to evolve visually and operationally in order to remain publicly relevant during a rapidly changing era. Yet for traditionalists surrounding Anne, that argument only deepened fears that convenience and image management were beginning to outweigh historical stewardship inside palace decision-making. Royal commentators later compared Anne's response to a form of institutional guardianship, describing her as someone increasingly determined to preserve the monarchy's emotional and historical foundations before the next royal transition fully arrives. And perhaps that is why insiders whisper this dispute exposed tensions far deeper than artifact placement alone. Beneath the controlled silence publicly maintained by the palace, older fears surrounding succession influence, and the monarchy's future direction reportedly resurfaced with alarming intensity. Because inside Windsor Castle, nothing symbolic is ever truly small. Every decision reflects power. Every preserved object reflects memory. And every boundary defended by Anne allegedly carried a message about who she believed still had the right to shape the crown's identity moving forward. But behind Anne's reported refusal stood something far more personal, a determination to defend the legacy she believed had been entrusted to her generation alone. What reportedly intensified the conflict even further was the lingering presence of Queen Elizabeth II's influence over Windsor Castle itself. Palace insiders claim Anne viewed many of the historical artifacts not simply as royal property, but as part of the late Queen's carefully protected legacy, a living connection between past monarchs and the uncertain future now unfolding under King Charles's reign. And according to those familiar with Anne's thinking, disturbing that continuity carried emotional consequences far beyond palace administration. For decades, Windsor Castle reportedly served as far more than a ceremonial residence for Queen Elizabeth II. Insiders often described it as the emotional refuge of her reign, the place where royal duty and private memory became inseparable after years of political turmoil, family fractures, and public pressure. According to palace commentators, Elizabeth viewed Windsor not simply as royal property, but as a sanctuary where the monarchy's deepest traditions remained preserved through discipline, restraint, and continuity. That emotional attachment allegedly shaped the way many senior royals, particularly Princess Anne, came to view the castle after the Queen's passing. To Anne, insiders whisper, Windsor represented the spiritual heart of her mother's legacy during a period when the institution itself seemed increasingly fragile beneath the surface. Reports suggest several of the artifacts under discussion allegedly carried deeply personal historical significance connected to moments that defined Elizabeth's reign. Some insiders claim certain preserved pieces were associated with wartime remembrance, state mourning periods, and coronation-era traditions that symbolized endurance during some of the monarchy's most uncertain decades. Others reportedly tied directly to private family moments known only to a small circle within the royal household. And because of that emotional weight, Anne allegedly believed relocating or restructuring those collections risked weakening the invisible continuity that had allowed the crown to maintain stability across generations. To her, according to palace whispers, these were not objects to be managed according to changing presentation strategies. They were fragments of institutional memory itself. That perspective reportedly gained quiet support from traditionalists within palace circles who feared the monarchy was entering a dangerous period of identity uncertainty. According to royal insiders, some senior staff privately sided with Anne's preservation stance, believing Windsor Castle should remain untouched by modernization efforts tied too closely to personal influence or evolving royal image management. Palace commentators suggest many within the older guard viewed Anne as one of the final defenders of Queen Elizabeth's deeply conservative approach to royal continuity. The late Queen had allegedly spent decades reinforcing the idea that the monarchy survives not through reinvention, but through carefully protected permanence. And insiders claim Anne carried that philosophy into every aspect of the disputes surrounding Windsor's historical collections. Meanwhile, reports suggest King Charles privately hoped tensions surrounding the issue would remain fully contained behind palace walls before public speculation escalated further. The monarchy was already navigating enormous scrutiny connected to illness, succession anxieties, and shifting public trust. According to palace observers, the last thing Charles reportedly wanted was another internal controversy fueling narratives about division inside the royal family during such a delicate stage of his reign. Yet the silence maintained publicly only seemed to intensify media fascination surrounding the disagreement. Without official clarification, speculation reportedly spread rapidly through royal commentary circles, where observers began interpreting the conflict as symbolic of broader fears about the monarchy's future direction under the current reign. What unsettled many insiders most was not necessarily the disagreement itself, but what it appeared to reveal underneath. The argument over artifacts allegedly exposed deeper emotional divisions about how the monarchy should evolve moving forward. One side reportedly believed adaptation and modernization were essential for survival in a rapidly changing world. The other feared that too much change risked severing the crown from the traditions that gave it meaning in the first place. And standing at the center of that emotional divide was Princess Anne, determined, according to palace whispers, to protect the continuity she believed Queen Elizabeth II had entrusted to her generation before the monarchy entered an uncertain new era. And as silence spread publicly, insiders whisper the palace itself was quietly beginning to divide behind closed doors. According to royal insiders, the disagreement reportedly evolved far beyond a dispute over artifacts and entered dangerous territory tied directly to royal authority and future influence. Palace administrative circles allegedly began splitting into quiet factions, those who believed modernization under Camilla was necessary, and those who viewed Anne as the final guardian, protecting the monarchy's historical soul. What once appeared to be internal disagreement suddenly carried the atmosphere of a royal succession struggle unfolding in silence. As tensions quietly spread through Windsor Castle and Buckingham Palace, insiders claim the atmosphere inside royal operations reportedly became noticeably more cautious. Staff members allegedly grew careful about what was discussed openly, who attended certain meetings, and which household received early access to sensitive information. Conversations that once flowed naturally between departments reportedly became more restrained, more calculated, and far more political beneath the surface. According to palace commentators, that subtle shift revealed something deeply unsettling. The disagreement surrounding Windsor's historical artifacts had allegedly awakened larger fears about influence, hierarchy, and the monarchy's direction once the current reign inevitably gives way to the next. Reports suggest Princess Anne quietly gained support from royal traditionalists who viewed her resistance as necessary rather than confrontational. To them, insiders whisper, Anne represented continuity during a time when the institution felt increasingly vulnerable to internal fragmentation. Some allegedly believed she was protecting not only Queen Elizabeth II's legacy, but the emotional identity of the monarchy itself. Within those circles, the Princess Royal reportedly became viewed as the final line separating royal preservation from gradual institutional drift. Her refusal to compromise allegedly resonated deeply among aides and senior figures who feared history could slowly become secondary to image management and modernization strategies tied to shifting royal priorities. But Camilla's allies reportedly saw the situation very differently. Sources claim frustration quietly intensified among those who believed Anne's resistance crossed the line from preservation into deliberate obstruction. Some insiders allegedly argued the monarchy could not survive indefinitely through rigid attachment to the past, while public expectations evolved rapidly around it. Others reportedly feared Anne's growing influence over preservation matters signaled a broader effort by royal traditionalists to limit Queen Camilla's long-term institutional authority. What made the conflict especially explosive, according to palace whispers, was that neither side believed they were merely arguing about artifacts anymore. They believed they were defending entirely different visions of the crown's future. Royal commentators later described the incident as symbolic of the next royal era because it revealed how closely questions of preservation had become tied to succession anxieties already simmering beneath palace operations. According to insiders, Prince William reportedly admired Anne's refusal to compromise when it came to defending royal continuity and historical integrity. Some observers even suggest the Prince of Wales saw Anne's actions as a model for how future leadership inside the monarchy may need to function during periods of institutional uncertainty. That interpretation only intensified speculation surrounding shifting influence behind palace walls, particularly as public fascination surrounding the future king and Catherine continued growing. And perhaps that is why fears surrounding internal royal power reportedly escalated so dramatically after the disagreement became known inside administrative circles. The issue allegedly exposed fragile divisions many within the institution had spent months attempting to suppress quietly during King Charles's reign. One camp reportedly prioritized modernization and adaptation to secure the monarchy's future relevance. The other feared that too much change risked weakening the very traditions that gave the crown its authority in the first place. And caught between those competing visions stood a visibly strained institution trying desperately to project unity, while deeper tensions quietly hardened underneath. But perhaps the most revealing part of the entire conflict was how quickly the palace reportedly moved to contain the fallout before the public saw the full extent of the divide. Then, almost as suddenly as the whispers emerged, silence returned to Windsor Castle. No official statements appeared, no public confirmations surfaced, yet according to insiders watching carefully, something inside the palace atmosphere reportedly changed permanently after Anne's intervention. Because inside the monarchy, the most decisive battles are rarely fought publicly. They unfold quietly through blocked requests, guarded meetings, and invisible lines that reveal who truly holds power when the crown enters uncertain times. In the days that followed, palace households reportedly resumed their carefully polished routines with almost unsettling precision. Public appearances continued. Ceremonial duties moved forward. Formal smiles returned to royal events, as though nothing unusual had ever happened behind the ancient walls of Windsor Castle. But insiders whisper that beneath the composed surface, relationships between certain royal circles allegedly became colder, more cautious, and far less trusting than before. Staff members reportedly noticed subtle changes in tone during internal coordination. Conversations became shorter, access allegedly tightened, and according to those familiar with palace operations, the emotional aftershocks of the dispute lingered long after the meetings themselves quietly ended. For Princess Anne, however, the confrontation reportedly strengthened her standing among royal traditionalists more than ever before. Palace commentators increasingly described her as the monarchy's uncompromising institutional guardian, someone willing to defend continuity even when doing so risked creating uncomfortable divisions behind closed doors. Insiders claim Anne's refusal to compromise over Windsor Castle reinforced a belief already growing quietly within royal circles that she viewed preservation not simply as duty, but as a sacred responsibility inherited directly from Queen Elizabeth II herself. To many observers, Anne emerged from the controversy not weakened by conflict, but further cemented as one of the last immovable pillars of the old royal order. At the same time, royal commentators suggest the incident exposed how fragile the monarchy's internal balance may have quietly become during King Charles's reign. What initially appeared to be a dispute over historical placement allegedly revealed much deeper anxieties surrounding succession, influence, modernization, and the emotional identity of the crown itself. Some insiders reportedly feared the disagreement reflected larger divisions already forming beneath palace operations, as different generations of royals envisioned the monarchy's future in sharply different ways. Others believed the silence maintained publicly proved just how seriously senior figures viewed the potential fallout if those tensions ever reached full public visibility. Meanwhile, public fascination surrounding the royal family's internal dynamics reportedly intensified precisely because no official explanation ever emerged. Without statements or clarification, speculation filled the silence. Royal observers began dissecting every appearance, every subtle interaction, every carefully measured public moment between senior members of the family, and as discussions spread across media circles, Windsor Castle itself reportedly became even more symbolically important in the public imagination. No longer viewed merely as a royal residence, it increasingly came to represent the emotional battlefield where competing visions of the monarchy's future were quietly colliding behind closed doors. What unsettled palace insiders most, according to whispers from within royal administrative circles, was the realization that the conflict may have permanently altered how influence is perceived inside the institution moving forward. Anne's intervention allegedly demonstrated that despite modernization efforts and evolving royal structures, certain figures within the monarchy still possessed enormous unseen authority when it came to protecting the crown's traditions. And perhaps that realization changed the atmosphere more than the disagreement itself. Because once invisible power reveals itself, even briefly, it becomes impossible for those inside the system to forget where the true lines of control still exist. And while the royal family continues presenting unity beneath polished appearances and carefully measured smiles, insiders whisper that the real struggle over the monarchy's future may already be unfolding behind the ancient walls of Windsor Castle. Royal observers now quietly suggest the controversy surrounding Windsor Castle revealed something much deeper than disagreement over historical placement. At its core, insiders claim the conflict exposed the growing fear inside royal circles that the monarchy could lose pieces of its identity during a period of transition, illness, and shifting authority. And for Princess Anne, reports suggest preserving those artifacts meant preserving the emotional memory of the crown itself. According to palace insiders, Anne has long viewed royal preservation not as ceremonial responsibility, but as a sacred lifelong duty inherited from Queen Elizabeth II herself. Windsor Castle reportedly became the emotional centre of that mission after the late Queen's passing, a place where continuity, memory, and royal identity remained protected against the uncertainty surrounding the monarchy's future. To Anne, insiders whisper, the conflict was never truly about moving historical objects from one room to another. It was about protecting the invisible thread connecting past monarchs to future generations, before that connection could quietly weaken beneath pressures for modernization and institutional change. But while Anne's supporters allegedly saw her actions as necessary protection of royal continuity, Camilla's allies reportedly argued modernization was being unfairly resisted during a period when the monarchy needed to evolve publicly in order to survive. That emotional divide allegedly deepened tensions inside palace circles already unsettled by growing succession anxieties surrounding King Charles's reign. Royal commentators quietly compared the dispute to earlier moments in royal history, when internal disagreements over symbolism, authority, and legacy exposed larger fears about the crown's future direction. And as speculation intensified publicly, palace staff reportedly became increasingly aware that influence within the monarchy itself was beginning to shift in ways few were willing to discuss openly. To this day, no public acknowledgement of the reported conflict has ever emerged from Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle. Officially, nothing happened. No disagreement existed. No battle over royal history unfolded behind closed doors. Yet, according to those familiar with palace operations, the silence itself may be the strongest indication that the confrontation cut far deeper than anyone outside the monarchy was ever supposed to understand. Because inside the royal institution, silence has always been one of its most powerful survival tools. Palace insiders reportedly believe the fallout quietly reshaped relationships behind closed doors, long after the public whispers faded away. Anne allegedly emerged with an even stronger reputation as protector of royal tradition, while some observers claim King Charles privately struggled to balance competing visions of the monarchy's future without allowing tensions to fracture public unity. Windsor Castle itself reportedly became even more emotionally significant after the dispute, symbolizing not merely royal history, but the growing battle over who would ultimately shape the monarchy's identity moving forward. And although polished appearances and carefully measured smiles continue projecting stability to the outside world, public fascination with hidden palace tensions reportedly continues growing stronger with every passing month. Because somewhere behind Windsor's ancient stone walls, insiders whisper the emotional scars left by the conflict never fully disappeared. The disagreement may have been silenced publicly, but the deeper struggle over legacy, continuity, and the future soul of the monarchy may still be unfolding quietly beyond public view. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.